As some of you may know, I spent most of my childhood growing up in the village of Marden in the county of Kent in England. This is almost 500 miles away from my current location of central Scotland. I'm surprised to say that it was only last year that I was made aware of some Christmas folklore surrounding my village and, more bizarrely, the long main road that I actually grew up on. This particular road stretches from the A29 at Stylebridge, just below the county town of Maidstone, all the way across to West Kent in Flimwell on the way to Hawkhurst, where in modern times we have the A21, close to Royal Tunbridge Wells. This busy main road has been a key travel route for centuries, even back to the days when the village of Marden took its name from Old English. Mar, from Gamar, meaning boundary, border, and Den, from Den with a double N, meaning woodland pasture. When I moved away from the village in 2004, housing developments and articulated lorries had begun to make the rural village seem less isolated. But when we moved up from London in 1991, the population was less than 3,000 people spread between Marden, Marden Thorn and Marden Beach. The area is and was predominantly hop farming. There are also fruit orchards and every so often small babbling brooks that cut the countryside into verdant fields of green. If you want to imagine the climate, these days there are even successful vineyards in the area. And being the bottom of a prehistoric lake, the ground is extremely fertile. Kent in general is referred to as the Garden of England. Now travel back in time so that you can picture a lush clearing of pastures among the dense British woodland. The sun is setting on a chilly winter's day. Frost begins to cling to the leaves on the hedgerows. Puddles ice over with creeping spirals of white lace. It's time to reveal the eerie origin of a ghost sighting that is said to occur every Christmas Eve for the last 250 years. It was a bitterly cold Christmas Eve when a woman and her elderly father were riding in their small carriage down the country lanes to Hawkhurst. In the 18th century, highwaymen were notorious and feared in the English countryside. They robbed whoever came their way, and sometimes the robbery was more violent than necessary, the thieves wanting to keep their identity anonymous so that they could continue their heists with impunity. In Kent, Hawkhurst housed some of the most notorious gangs and smugglers at the time, making the place feared along the English coast as well as inland. This tendency to violent robbery had been the unfortunate case for the young woman's brother who had been killed previously, possibly even on the same stretch of road. But, being so rural, there was only one road to get between the local towns. The intrepid pair, father and daughter, were making good time as they made their way back towards their own village. The moon was rising, and though it was Christmas Eve, they didn't mind the travel, safe in their knowledge that they would be home in a couple of hours, ready to spend the next day in church and celebrating with their extended family around a dinner table laden with festive food. As the pair drove their carriage through the tiny village of Marden, past the blacksmith's forge and out towards the Goudhurst Road, they spotted a dark figure in the bushes standing next to a tethered horse. Keeping up a good pace, the carriage approached the figure, who was shrouded by shadows cast in the cold moonlight. When they were just about to pass, the figure threw a large branch onto the road and the carriage had to come to an abrupt halt. The daughter raised her lantern, and in the wavering candlelight, she could see the figure was the well-known highwayman called Gilbert. Fearing for their lives, they obeyed his commands as he ordered the father and daughter to leave their carriage in order to strip them of their worldly possessions and valuables. But, in a cruel twist of fate, as soon as the daughter first stepped onto the ground, their horse bolted, carrying her father away in the empty carriage, leaving her all alone with the terrifying Gilbert at the side of a dark, lonely road. As she was being sized up by Gilbert, the young woman, in her state of shock, recognised the highwayman as the very one who had murdered her brother. Knowing that he would never let her leave, as she had seen his identity, the young woman mustered all of her courage, becoming enraged at the injustice. She drew a knife hidden from about her person and stabbed Gilbert with all her might. She plunged the knife deep into his side, rupturing his intestines, leaving him writhing in agony. Seizing her chance, she ran off into the dense woodland, panic-stricken, fearing that Gilbert would recover and give chase. Several hours later, the young woman's father returned with help from his friends in their home village. When they arrived at the site of the robbery, all they could find was Gilbert's horse still tethered to a tree and the lifeless body of Gilbert himself rolled into a shallow drainage ditch covered in blood. The father searched for his daughter until sunrise, to no avail. It wasn't until the morning, Christmas morning, that the young woman was found by the villagers of Marden. She was wandering around the back lanes to the farms, covered in mud and scratches, claiming that she'd stabbed a man to death. The legend tells that although she escaped alive and unharmed, at some point during the night, she had gone completely mad with fright. And then, every Christmas Eve night since, the same grisly scene, the robbery and the highwayman's murder, is repeated by the ghosts on that well-used stretch of country road in the unassuming village of Marden. This local legend was first documented in 1901 by the Kentish writer Sir Charles Igglesden. In some variations, the highwayman's body was buried at the side of the road where he was killed, causing people to avoid that stretch of road, especially on Christmas Eve. Some versions even had Gilbert remaining alive at the time the father returned to look for his daughter, and that he was the one to tell the father how he had been recognised, and that was the reason for the young woman stabbing him and running off. Whichever version you believe, the road between Marden and Hawkhurst can still be quite eerie in the dead of winter. Though the woodland and thickets on each side of the road have been replaced by muddy fields and a sprinkling of houses, the lack of streetlights, the screech of an owl, the bark of a fox in the distance, these all add to an ethereal atmosphere. Maybe the people that live in the village have now forgotten the legend because the elderly residents have died without passing it on to the next generation. Or maybe it was a cautionary tale of the time, suggesting that vulnerable passengers shouldn't travel at night on that notorious route. Whatever the truth may be, it's still fascinating to think that I spent 13 years growing up in the village, my parents still live there, and I had never heard of this grisly tale until now.